This is the candlestick chart which we'll be building today. It's built using Deneb and Vega-Lite. Before we dive into this spec, you'll have to create a few measures that this chart works with. And the data is based on my previous video about Yahoo Finance. Let's first review the measures that you will need to create. So for close, high, low, open prices, you don't really have to make measures. You can use columns. However, I decided to make simple sum measures for those columns. You don't have to though. There are 4 measures that you will have to make. Let's start with 20-day simple moving average. Well, it's kind of self-explanatory, right? It calculates simple moving average for the last 20 days. And it's rolling. For this, I'm using average X, which is an iterator. Dates and period, I'm using date column here directly from the quotes table. I don't have date table here because it's an example. Last date, 20 days before, so minus 20 days, again, based on date column. And I'm calculating that for closing price. Okay, so this is the first one that you need to create. Next one is standard deviation. I'll not be diving into what standard deviation is. This is a statistical term, not the topic of this video. So, standard deviation. There is actually inbuilt function in DAX for this called stdef. And make sure to use the X1, which is an iterator, .py. And again, it's actually quite similar to average X, at least the syntax is similar. Dates and period, date, minus 20, the same. We're calculating standard deviation for a rolling 20 days. And based on close column. This is the second measure that you need to make. The third one and fourth one, they're quite similar. Those are the measures that support those Bollinger bands. This is the light blue area chart which you see behind candles. So we'll need to create 2 measures, lower band and upper band, basically. And this is how it's calculated based on rolling 20-day moving average minus standard deviation multiplied by 2. This is for lower band. The difference for upper band is that you're adding instead of removing. Okay. Once you created those measures, we can move on to the spec itself. Make sure to add Deneb visual onto your canvas. Make sure to add all of the columns and measures into the visual itself, and then you can navigate to edit. Once you do, switch to settings and make sure that here is specified Vega-Lite. SVG is always better. And make sure to turn on those 2 options, expose cross-highlight values for measures and expose cross-highlight for dataset rows. We'll need that for some functionality within the visual. Namely, when you press on a candle, the rest becomes more transparent and the selected candle is highlighted. We'll need it for this. So let's go back to the spec. I'll be switching between Power BI and another tool, which I think is a bit easier to see the structure of this whole spec. As you might know, Deneb or Vega-Lite specs are JSON based, therefore it follows certain structure. There is a lot of nesting, so I thought it might be easier to visualize it in sort of a tree structure. And yeah, let's go through it. So we start with auto-sighted. Here I'm specifying feet y-axis. Y-axis and not x-axis. Reason being is that, and I'm switching back to Power BI, is that we have lots of dates. Depending on how much data do you have, if it's 1 year, 2 years, or even 10, 20 years, if you're trying to fit it into your canvas, the canvas might be too thin, so you will not see much. So I wanted to keep them of certain size, and that's why I'm not trying to fit it in on x-axis, just y-axis. So that's the reason. So that's what we start with. Data, name dataset. This is standard when you work with Power BI. This is standard dataset Power BI creates with all those columns and measures that you added into the visual. Now the next thing that we do is transform. And first of all, we need to sort data. It should be sorted by date, right? Either in ascending or descending order, up to you, how you prefer to see it. Now the next thing is I'm calculating moving average within visual itself. And actually, I would suggest maybe not to. When your measures calculate averages, they will expand the scope of dates and calculate it properly. However, the data that you provide to the visual is limited within those date bounds. Because of that, maybe you haven't noticed, but this orange line, which represents moving average, it actually should align more with the bands, upper and lower, but as you can see, it follows a bit of different trend line. And this happens because it's calculated within visual itself, based on the limited data, and because of that, it starts where the visual starts, and that's opposite to where the Bollinger lower and upper band measures start. So just FYI, I didn't fix it here, but I think it should be fixed. So yeah, window function, which calculates moving average, and the frame is minus 20 days. Same as we had in DAX measure in Power BI, based on close field. The next thing that I specify is width, which is 5. And let's see what happens if I comment it out. What will happen is everything will become a bit more skewed together. The more data you will have, the more skewed together it will be. So I wanted to add a bit more space between all of the candles, and that's why I specified manually. You can play with it, you can leave it on automatic, up to you. I decided to go this route. So this is width. And that's where all the fun begins. We're going to layers. There are lots of those. So the first layer, here is our structure, and the first layer that I'm adding is area. Since I want those Bollinger area chart be at the back, behind candles, I specified first. Okay, so the first layer is area chart. This is that light blue highlighted area. Interpolation here is monotone because I wanted it to be smoothed out a bit, less jagged. However, you can specify linear here, for example, or step. Okay, that will make you see the difference. Okay, You can see here, it became like a steps, like a staircase. Okay. However, I don't want that. So I will bring it back to monotone. The color is light blue shade, specified here, and opacity is 20%. Again, to have that light blue. Okay. The next is encoding. So we have to attach it to data fields somehow. And the data fields that I'm attaching it to, or columns I'm attaching it to, are for x-axis it's date, temporal, and it will be the case for all of the layers. And for y-axis, and we actually have two, it's lower band and upper band. Date is temporal, which means time, and bands are quantitative. The next mark, or the next layer here, is line, and actually two lines. I overlaid two lines for upper band, one line for upper band and one line for lower band, just so you can see it more clearly. This is that dashed line here at the top and at the bottom. So those are two layers, and I will go through just one because they're absolutely similar. The difference is just filter they map to. So the line, again, interpolation monotone, that's so it fully aligns with area chart. Color, just a bit deeper shade of blue. This is how you create a dashed line. Here you can play with it and specify different dashes. Width and opacity. And you're mapping it to date and upper band. And you're doing the same with the lower band. Okay, so moving on. Next line, or next layer, is the line that represents moving average, the orange one, which goes in the middle. This one is orange. The interpolation is still monotone. I turned off tooltip, however, might be a good idea to enable it. Why not? Now, what we're mapping it here is our internal field, which we created here earlier in the window function, which calculates mean, which is average, for minus 20 days or rolling 20 days period. So we are mapping it to this one. However, as I mentioned, it might be better to bring over 20 days SMA field and map it to that one. We can try it right now. Let's see if I brought it here into the visual. I believe I am. So let's try changing it. 20-day SMA. Okay, we'll change it here. And we will change it here as well. And it's not 1 month, it's 20-day moving average. So let's see how the orange line changes with that. And it did. As I mentioned, it did. Because it has more data to work with. Maybe let me exit for a second. Because it has more data to work with, it actually calculates rolling average properly. And what you see here, it's a bit more aligned with those Bollinger bands. So now it works properly. Okay, let's move on. So the next mark, the next layer is called rule. These are those lines that you see. And the way you read a candlestick chart is, so first you look at the color. If it's red, it means that stock started higher and then at the end of the day it closed at the lower price. If it's green-ish, then it means that stocks started at the lower price and then ended the day with the higher price. Okay, this is the color. And those rules or those lines that you see which go through the candle, those represent the highs and lows of the day. It's that easy. Okay, so we have the rule mark, we have tooltip enabled, then we have encoding, we have the up into date table, okay, date column, which is temporal, and here this is where a lot of customization happens actually. So let me zoom out a bit and let's go through it. So first we want to see the grid. This is what you see, okay, those grid lines. Then we want to make them light gray, just so that they don't take too much attention but still visible. And specify some opacity. Okay, 50% opacity. Now, what else do we want to do? Domain. Actually, despite you seeing here the main color light gray, it's set to 0, so you don't see it on the visual itself. I turned it off. Antiques as well, I turned them off, so you don't see them. Title for the axis turned off. Format is custom. So if we zoom in here to x-axis, you see that the format I specified is year, months, date, which is a bit more universal than using the European date format that we usually use, or American one, which differs. This one is a bit more universal. Label angle, to angle them this way. If you remove minus sign here, as you can see here, it will switch or will be angled differently. However, I prefer to see it this way, where the year is at the bottom, date is at the top. Overlap, so they're not overlapping, and some padding in between, or actually padding from the canvas itself. Okay, so this is date customization. Now let's see what we have for low and high. So for our rules, and here we have again grid turned on, etc. I will not be going through this again. What I want to highlight here is actually condition for color. So as you can see here, those rules and also bars are conditionally colored. If stocks closes on a higher price, it's colored green, lower price, it's colored red. So this happens here in the color section. And actually, let's switch and see where it's nested. If you have static color, it's specified on the mark level. As you can see here, for the line that we had, average, it's specified on the mark level. However, if you want to make it conditioned, you have to move it to encoding level. That's what you will see here. That's fine. This is our rule mark. This is our encoding for the rule mark. And let's find the color. And then within encoding, we have color specified, standard value, and then condition. So depending whether it's static or conditional, it will be placed differently in the spec. Let's go back to the spec here. So, and what we see here, it's color, condition, test, what we're comparing. If open is less or equals to close, we're coloring it green, otherwise red. Okay. And the same, or not the same, but again, we're using conditionals for opacity. This is for This is made for this logic with highlighting selected candlestick. So here we are basing it off this selected field, which you can see here in the dataset, which has 3 different or possible values: neutral, on, and off. So here we are basing it on. If it's on, it's fully opaque. If it's off, it's more transparent. And otherwise, default is this. And actually, shouldn't I make default this? I should I? So yeah, by default it shouldn't be transparent either. Okay, and then we're specifying tooltip, what we want to see in the tooltip when user hovers in. Date, okay, this is standard, and then we're listing all of the fields that we want to see here. And here, important part is that I'm formatting it using PBI format to this format, which I hope you're familiar with already, and if you are not, I made video about that before. So, okay, this is the tooltip that we're getting as the result. As you can see, number is formatted properly. Okay, let me go back to the spec and let's see what's left. There are a few things that I hid here, which are not present anyways, and we're getting to the bar. So this is our bars here. Maybe one thing to highlight here is I added some inner padding so that you can play with that if you want them narrower or wider. Actually, I think that might look a bit better. So let's leave it on 0.5. But notice this, 0, false. Actually, you can see that my y-axis does not start with 0, which is intentional. Although best practice is that you should always start with 0 here, because for the long time stock price could be within certain range. If you start from 0, that's what happens. Let's see what happens. This is what happens, and therefore you will not see fluctuations that well. That's the reason why I disabled starting from 0, and it actually adjusts automatically depending on your data. That way you can actually see fluctuations more. Okay, moving on. This logic, conditionals for opacity and color, repeats the same ways as in rule mark. And tooltip is the same. And that's actually all. We're finished. What you're getting as the result is this candlestick chart. And that's all for today. Subscribe and see you in the next one.